So in this video, we are going to be looking at English, basically rewrites. So in our video today, we'll be looking at rewrites. Yeah, so before I start, don't forget to subscribe, share and comment the video if it was helpful to you. So today in our video, as I've told you, we are going to be looking at rewrites. So the way you understand rewrites is not by just solving each rewrite question, but you have to understand the principle behind changing the sentence. So today we are going to look at two topics which are broad in rewrite. The first topic is relative clause. So this is one of the topic which they like bringing questions on when you are talking about rewrite. So what are the relative clause? So relative clause, these are words like who, whom, which, that, and whose. So these 5 words are the words which are known as the relative clause. So these words are the words which you can use to join two sentences. That's why they are known as the relative clause. They are used to join two sentences. So now I'm going to show you how where you can use who, when you can use whom, and when you can use which and that, just like that. So when can we use who? So we can only use who in a sentence rewrite whenever you are referring to people. So this one, you use it when you are referring to people, not things. Yeah, an example I can give you is, let's say for example, I have, so this is an example. I have a friend. Then he lives in Chamboli. So then you are asked to join this sentence using the relative clause. So since we said you are talking about a friend, and a friend is a what? Is a person. So meaning we are going to use who to join these two sentences. So you can say, I have a friend who lives in Chamboli. So that's how you can join these two sentences into one sentence using the clause who. So the next clause we are going to look at is what? Whom. So the next clause we are going to look at is whom. Where can you use now whom? So when we're talking about whom is a relative clause which is used to talk about something which are related. So here when you're talking about whom, you have to make sure you're talking about something related to someone, and it also talks about people. So this is whom when you are referring to something related. So an example I can give you is that, let's say the example is, we chose the girl, full stop, then she is Mary's cousin. Then they have told you that join these two sentences using this relative clause. So how can you join these two sentences? We say that whenever you are talking about something related, you have to use whom. So you can say the girl whom we chose is Mary's cousin. So you have seen that we have joined this sentence and this sentence using whom. So here when you are looking at relative clause, what you need to understand is whenever you are talking about who, you have to refer it to people. Then when you have also people, then they are related, you have to use what? Whom. Then next you are going to look at which. So when can we use which now? So which is basically used to refer to things or animals. So whenever you are talking about things or animals, just remember that the relative clause which you should use is what? Which. So this relative clause, they also come in a clause text. Those texts, they leave dashes. For example, they have written here, then a dash. You have to find the word. So this also applies to that, and it also applies to what? To Leelites. So we say that when we are using which, we use which to refer to things or animals. Then don't worry, I'll show you the example. So the example which we can talk about here is a book. So you can say e.g. the book belongs to John. Full stop. And it is lying on the table. So again, when you look at this question, let's say you have been told to join this sentence using the relative clause. So how can you join this? We say that whenever we are referring to things or animals, we use the relative clause which. So here we are going to say, first thing you have to know what are you talking about. So we're talking about the book. So they say the book. Which book? The book which belongs to who? To John. Is lying on the table. So this relative clause are the clauses we use when we are joining two sentences. Remember that. Then the two we have is that and whose. So where can we use that and where can we use whose? So whose is similar to whom. They both represent something related. But when we talk about whose, so whenever we are using whose shows possession. What do we mean? So when we are using whose in the sentence, we are meaning that something belongs to someone. That's why we say whose. an example I can give you is, let's say I've been given a question like, I know the girl, full stop, the brother won the championship. Then you have been told to join this sentence using a relative clause. How can you join this? So we said that whenever you are talking about possession, you have to use the word whose. So here, what is the possession? So the possession is the championship. The brother won the what? The championship. And you also know the girl. So meaning you have to say that I know the girl So since his brother won the championship belongs to him. So it shows possession between the brother and the championship. So that's why we are going to use whose. So the girl whose brother won the championship. Yeah. So this is how easy relative clause are, and this is how you can get almost any rewrite on relative clause correct. Then when you talk about that, so that can be used in place of who and which, but you don't have to like replace it anyhow. So lastly, we are going to talk about two terms which also comes. So the first one is, so we are done talking about the relative clause. So you have to remember the relative clause we have talked about. We have talked about who, whom, which, and that. So now we are going to look at time clause. So what are these time clause? So time clause are as soon as, no sooner, no sooner than, and of course we have the time conjunction. What are the time conjunction? So time conjunction, these are while, after, before, and when. So when we are talking about time conjunctions, we are referring to while, after, before, and when. So these three are what are known as the time clauses. So these are where you have to use them in time. So how can you use the three? So the first one is simple. The first one, as soon as, is the simplest you can use here. So the way I can just tell you is, whenever you are using as soon as possible in the middle of the sentence, you have to omit the what? The comma. So for example, if as soon as is at the beginning of the sentence, make sure there is a comma inside your answer. Yeah. Then when you talk about no sooner, so when you're talking about no sooner, so immediately you say no sooner, the next word you have to put is add. So no sooner add, then you continue with your sentence. Then you also have to remember that inside the sentence there should be than. So now that we have talked about this, let's look at some examples. Yeah. So these are some of the examples under rewrites. So the first example is talking about the relative clause. So the question is saying, the men have been arrested, full stop. They tried to break into the shop. So here, the relative clause we have to use is what? Which has to be related to what? To people. Because we are saying men are people. So you can say the men who have been arrested tried to break into the shop. Or you can say, what can you say? So the correct answer is the men. What were the men doing? So after you have written the men, the next thing you're supposed to do is what were they doing? And the result of what they were doing. So you can say the men who tried to break into the shop have been arrested. Yeah, meaning we have used our relative clause who. So here this is the full delight which you can get marks for. Then the next one is, I'm trying to remember the name of the hotel. We, full stop, we usually stop at that particular hotel. So whenever we are talking about the hotel, remember, the hotel is not thing, the hotel is not people. So meaning whenever you are talking about things, whatever should come into your mind is what? Which. So the hotel is a thing. So meaning the relative clause we are going to use here is what? Which. So how can you say? So here you can say, I'm trying to remember the name of the hotel which we usually stop at.